done it for everybody else, and we kind of feel like we know how to do it for ourselves. We also wanted to leverage emerging tech to figure out a newer and better way to crowdsource the early development of IP, and that's what we did, and it worked out more than well.
Hello and welcome to the Kids Media Club podcast. I'm Jo Redfern.
I'm Emily Horgan, and Andy, we have guests.
We do. So we've got Nick Cabana, co-founder and co-chief creative officer of Claynosaurz, and Andrew Pelekis, CEO of Claynosaurz as well. Great to have you on the show, guys.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here. I mean, collectively, we're both so stoked to be here, and actually, we met, a couple. I mean, how quickly does time go by? Like a month and a half ago at NSC. It was amazing. So really stoked to finally be here.
Yeah, and it was great to bump into you at Annecy, because you guys were a kind of a light of hope, I think, for a lot of animators in terms of what you're doing and how you're kind of making it work. So could you kind of just give us a little bit of background for people that don't know what you do in terms of how you operate and kind of what makes you different?
Yeah. So maybe a little bit of context about me is I come from the animation industry. I started my career at Sony Pictures Animation. So at the time they were working on Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2 and stuff like that. And eventually migrated to the visual effects side of things because I was a big nerd. I grew up with Jurassic Park. I wanted to do creature work. And that's what I ended up doing. So I supervised shows like Game of Thrones, Paddington 2. I've been involved on every Fantastic Beasts film and a slew of other things. And over time, you sort of outgrow that, and you kind of, as a creative, want to build your own thing. But also, at the beginning of COVID, we were seeing a lot of issues that were starting to come to light with the entertainment industry, primarily an over-competitive market. Attention spans are scattered. There's discovery is really difficult for brands, and now there's a big focus on sequels because nobody wants to take a risk on new IP. And we were also a bunch of artists that were like, you know what, like we've built Minions, we've been involved on things like Spider-Verse, we've done it for everybody else, and we kind of feel like we know how to do it for ourselves. We also wanted to leverage emerging tech to kind of figure out a newer and better way to crowdsource the early development of IP, and that's what we did, and it worked out more than well.
And how about you, Andrew? Tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to Claynosaurz.
Absolutely. So actually, like Nick said, him and a few artists, they sort of founded Claynosaurz. They built it, for the distribution channels that were available at the time. And Nick and I are actually really old friends. So I've known Nick for, at this point, 20 plus years. And my background is very different, actually. It's business stuff. It's private equity, private credit, it's investments, that kind of thing. And at the time that they were starting to build the Claynosaurz project, I was talking to Nick and his partners at the time, just for a little bit of like business advice, think about these things, think about those things. I'm not an IP expert necessarily, but, just some very basic things. And so after they actually launched the project of digital collectibles, which had, an immense amount of success at that time, they called me the next day, or actually I think we were seeing each other the next day by pure fluke. And I got wind of sort of a series of, very, basic business problems. Nothing, crazy, just the standard sort of thing. And, there's money, but there's no bank accounts. And then there's, partnerships, but there's no agreements. And then there's IP, but there's, 15 people that built it. It's like, okay, well, at the time I was sort of freelancing in my own career, if you will. And I said to them, well, you know what, let me hop in and sort of help with you guys on this endeavor as a friend, So the initial intent was to be there for, a few weeks and kind of tie up these loose ends, but going down the rabbit hole of, some of the problems Nick just touched on, or this, very, I think, pivotal moment in the entertainment business, started to realize that even folks in my business, so I came across sort of a strategy that Blackstone was employing vis-a-vis Moonbug and then, KKR, works with Media One, and these are, firms that we know very well. I said, it's interesting because I've worked with these firms in other capacities, and, if they're doing things in the entertainment space, which is actually an unfamiliar sector for most investors, there must be something here. And so going down the rabbit hole and helping them at this high level, kind of quickly realized, oh wow, there really is an immense opportunity in the space, not just from a business perspective, but for sort of like this, I think, artist empowerment perspective, where distribution is so wide open, production is becoming ever more accessible vis-a-vis AI, even if that's a little bit controversial, and sort of cheaper tools. And to the point, the guys that Nick brought together to build the Claynosaurz original collection, they did it themselves, right? And with no AI at the time, or I think de minimis AI, but they were able to bring together the resources and do it themselves. So, which gives you a good data point that, production is more accessible and more abundantly available for people. So, one thing led to the other, and kind of sat down with the guys after tying up all those silly loose ends and kind of nailed down what we thought was a very interesting strategy to pursue the IP, because the great thing that we had achieved, or they had achieved, is in launching this collection was fandom, right? Like they had gotten a bunch of fans that were really, really into it, that wanted more stuff. And I think, I think it's an old saying or a heuristic of sorts where, the toughest thing to do for any business is getting your first, 100 or first 1,000 fans or clients, if you will, whatever the word may be. And they had done that in such a material amount where these were not just fans or clients, these were super fans. Like they just wanted more Claynosaurz stuff. So, the space in which they launched the project had a vacuum for quality. And like Nick said, he brought this really stellar team together who had, experience on all these films that we're familiar with and TV shows. And it had really captured the attention of a lot of people very quickly. So from that point onwards, I just told the guys, like, I know the end goal here is maybe a TV show or a movie. And, I can't see that in the cards at this moment, but if we try and grow a little bit day by day, over time, maybe we'll get there. And, 3 years later, and we're getting there quite well. So it's been quite a crazy journey, but honestly, a very, very rewarding one. And, relative to my previous career, working with creative folks is a lot more fun. It's a lot more fun, I'll tell you that.
So tell us a little bit for our listeners at home who might not have come across the IP, like tell us a little bit about what it's about, how it started, that initial project, where it's at now, like give us the 101.
Oh man. Yeah, so, a lot of us grew up with things like, oh my God, we're nerds, like Masters of the Universe and things like that. And of course we're creatives in the industry, and we wanted to build a property that was like, that had a lot of toyetic potential. We love dinosaurs. Most of us grew up with Littlefoot or properties like that. Like we're
The Land
back.
Before Time, I feel like, is due a reboot.
Yeah. Oh no, not a live action reboot, but could be cool. But yeah, we were so inspired by that stuff, and we knew that dino properties were hot in light of Jurassic World sort of reinvigorating the market. But we also knew that the children's space for dinosaurs was a little bit saturated with things that felt kind of just normal. Um, and what we wanted to do is a property that had extreme potential for scaling, flexibility, and to leverage just our know-how in character design and storytelling and all that and animation, especially, of course. And that's what we did. So Claynosaurz is this world that leans heavy on, it's vibrant, it's rich with colors. You can have, we wanted to lean on collectibles as well to future-proof the IP. So you've got tons of different species that are extremely appealing, and each of them have all these different SKUs. And we lean a little bit on the fantasy of things. They're called Claynosaurz. So clay has this sort of magical element to it. The world is sort of made of it, but we don't want to lean too heavy on the claymation. It's more of like, if you think Arcane is leans on magic, clay is very much the same thing. It's not about that. It's just a design kind of language, and maybe a metaphor for a few things. And the TV show that we just announced with Media One, that's going to focus on 4 main characters, and that'll be Bex the Bronto, Trix the Triceratops, Milo the Stego, Little Brain Big Heart, and then Flea the Red T-Rex. And it'll be very much a character based adventure comedy. and it'll be 39 episodes, 7 minute range, which is great because we're doing a YouTube first approach, but it's also prepackaged for European distribution, and eventually as premium content, it'll be ready for the streamers. And the cool thing about 7 minutes is you can take 3 episodes if done correctly and convert them into a 21-minute episode if you need. So we're thinking about all these things, but really we're a transmedia brand. So the approach was you got to meet the audiences where they're at, and you got to tell many different stories in many different places, which I think is not something that early brands tend to do. Most studios will say we're either making a TV show or we're making a movie, and that is where it starts, and we're going to build it for 2 years, and we're going to invest $80 million on this thing and hope it's sticky. And we were like, well, actually, ground zero is atomized content and is early inclusion of the fan and is social media, is meet them where they're at, right? And it's almost akin to, do you guys remember the OneRing.net when Peter Jackson was developing Lord of the Rings? So one of the first of its kind, and he was doing development journals for almost a year before the first movie came out. At the time, if you guys remember it, spending that amount of money on a 3-part blockbuster where fantasy wasn't really successful before it, there was a lot of friction there. His kind of approach to it was, let's bring the audience in while we're building this movie. Let's make that what makes it attractive, and let's get people to fall in love with Vigo. Let's get people to fall in love with Andy Serkis and the humans behind building this crazy idea that we have. That's what pulled a lot of people, like myself included, in, right? I had never read the books.
Yeah, I was going to say also for the people that had read the books, it was a very smart way to bring them on that journey and to have their kind of loyalty rather than them throwing arrows at it afterwards because it didn't match their vision of the book. So yeah, that's very smart.
You know what? You nailed it. Where you buy a lot of trust because it's so authentic and it's so sometimes messy, right? And you get to see that the people behind it really do care. And I think that helps for the, like you say, the fans of what if the properties already existed beforehand. But it definitely helps pull people in because you're like, you know what? Like, I want to see where this goes. And our approach is also very similar to the approach of like YouTube content creators that slowly it's a creator-led approach, and no one had really done that. There's been a few success stories like Hell of a Boss or Has Been Hotel and a few others, Digital Circus, and I think we sort of are starting to fall into that side of things. But for whatever reason, studios they're starting to look at this tactic, but it's still very it's still a sometimes a polarizing thing for executives to say we're going to make free content. It's going to exist on every platform.
Yeah, and it's quite hard for studios because really what the very definition of being creator-led means is that you disintermediate a lot of things. You go direct to the audience. You have that really close relationship with them. And studios really are built and predicated on a bit of distance. You know, there's lots of middlemen. There's lots of phases in between you and your audience. So I'm interested in digging into that because obviously you launched the collection, the initial collection of just over 10,000 NFTs to get this thing going. But obviously you can't incorporate all of those characters into a series. So then I've noticed that you've got tribes. So as creatives, how did you then start to formulate this into something that turned into, first of all, micro content, but now something that's being developed for TV?
Oh, what a question. That's awesome. So yes, we have actually in the initial like collections, there was 2 original collections. There was an expansion one. So let's say about 12,000 characters, plus a new expansion of 25,000 characters recently. Just because they all exist doesn't mean we have to pull them into the content. But what we are developing through Unreal Tech is the ability to reward fans and say, hey, because you've done this, boom, your character in the episodes that come out 3 weeks from now are going to be extras. We can do that pretty easily, and that was the whole point, is to provide experiences around those collectibles to have a great excuse for more content. But to make those early patrons feel like there's so much that they're getting in return. There's a lot of emotional utility that comes with that. And when I look at the Kickstarter model, what's broken with that is you're saying, hey, someone wants to make a short film, I will throw some money at it and hope it works, and that's where the relationship ends. But when you tie that to digital assets and especially digital collectibles, it creates a two-way channel because you can constantly reward those collectibles, but you can treat them as a account or a digital passport into everything you do as a company, and it's the glue that keeps everything together. So our digital collectibles um, basically interface with everything we do, whether it's gaming, whether it's content, whether it's physical product. When you're dealing with our physical plushies, there are digital loops in there that also speak back to the original collectibles, and it's a sort of gamified loyalty system that's pretty close to what Steam and Counter Strike and some of those games do, where you have a gamified viewing experience. If you view some of the matches or if you view some of the rounds, you'll get something in return, and it's a flex mechanism.
It's a CRM system, ostensibly, isn't it? So does that mean that you as creatives also have to spend a lot of your time, or someone in your team has to spend a lot of their time managing the relationship with your fans?
Yeah, so Andrew's laughing because we're there right with them. And for example, at Annecy, the events that we held over there, of which we had over 1,000 people show up, we had over 40 of some of our biggest collectors or early fans show up there with us. And so we had private events for them. We treat them almost like Disney Club 33 in a way. A lot of like VIP loops, and it's a lot of fun for them. What's great is we get a lot of feedback from them or their kids, which is super valuable to us because social media is a little bit of our test kitchen, but so is that early fan base to kind of figure out product market fit. But you do need community management. I think that's something that the large companies struggle with. You need to be in what we call the trenches. You even if you're a CEO, even if you're running the creative team, you have presence as a founder, so that you're very authentic. Again, it's the creator approach. In the early days of a YouTube creator, that person is there with their audience, communicating all the time and getting that feedback loop. And I think you're going to see so many brands emerge that way, big time.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm struck by, as much as it's a creator-led approach, it feels like it's very much a fan-led approach. But in this case, your fans are also, in some ways, a bit like startup shareholders, at least the original. Is there a tension between the original, in the same way as the startup, there might be the original shareholders might have a vision for where the company's going? Is there ever any tension with the original fans having their idea of where this show is going, if it diverges from where you'd like to take it?
I think I can touch a little bit on that relationship because, well, for one, they're not shareholders. Just to be very strict about the word, because these are digital collectibles, but they do have this emotional attachment, like Nick said, and the premise there is, and Andy, your question totally has the right angle, but their buy-in, so to speak, is more like, this is a collectible. And it's the example that I like to use often with people new to the landscape is sort of like buying like a Michael Jordan rookie card, but when he's a rookie, right? Like you're buying it in '85, right? Like you want to buy it and you're sort of like, oh, I'd love to see Michael Jordan succeed. And this card will then become even cooler and mean even more than it does today. And I think that's a lot of the angling, but it does mean, to your point, like they've got a lot of opinions about, where the show should go. Or where the game should go, or why are you doing a game? Why are you doing a show? Why don't you do a movie? There's a lot of opinions going around. I think, in many ways, this community, and I think the initial question before this one, it almost sounds like a bit of a liability. Like you gotta be there all the time. It take a lot of time. And my first foray into this, I was like, I kind of approached it that way too. I'm like, guys, this is a lot. It's like, I'm used to quarterly meetings with the shareholders, and then I get on with the rest of my quarter, and this is every day. But actually, over the long run, you quickly find out that, well, one, you've got to build teams around this. This is also like a press department's worst nightmare, right? Like, oh, everyone could talk to everyone all the time. It's like, oh my goodness. I think this is actually a really important point, because we often get the questions like, well, why doesn't, a big studio take this approach? And I think that's often a non-starter, especially if you're like a publicly traded company and you have reputational risk and someone might say one thing and so on and so forth. But we do a pretty good job, and we're small enough to do this, where everyone in our team is capable of participating inside of the community. And I wouldn't say they're trained, because it sounds a little bit more formal than it is, but they understand what the voice of the company is, what the do's and don'ts are, which are just sensible human rules. There's no rule book for this. And it ends up actually, in the long run, you get a lot of really great feedback. So to your point, you get feedback. And sometimes, anytime you're releasing anything or doing any project to tens of thousands, or now we've got, quite a few hundreds of thousands of followers and so on and so forth, you're going to have some diverging opinions, right? However, when you kind of like peel it back and get rid of the noise, and in some cases the criticisms, and you say, well, okay, these are actually some pretty good points here and there, you end up with actually a ton of great feedback that you otherwise wouldn't get when you're building other sort of TV shows or video games or movies.
Or you'd have to pay a research firm quite a lot of money to go out and find it out for you.
Exactly. And I think also there's, in that environment, your research firm or the folks doing this, they're kind of, you're a client, they want you to be happy. It's not this raw like feedback, right? Or if you're getting a test, you're doing sort of like a test demo of your show or a pilot to a small group of people, like they're being paid to be there. They might not want to, upset you. They might, be a little bit, we get some pretty harsh feedback, I'd say sometimes, but ultimately it's actually for the betterment of the underlying brand and product. And, once you peel away sort of that emotional part, you have a really, really great feedback set, and the numbers are gigantic, right? And they really care. And I think that means that your feedback is very, very high quality. So as much as it sounds like a liability, and my instinct was the same, it ends up being a very, very big asset to the company, but to the IP, and it benefits everyone. The bigger the IP gets and the better it is. And Nick can probably give you some examples of great community feedback that's led to legitimate decision-making internally.
I mean, you got to be careful with too many cooks in the kitchen. So you need to, as a creative team, you need to have certain metrics. But what this was 3 years ago and what it is today, which is a much better place, is definitely a large part of that is due to that feedback. And I just wanted to point out, there was this question from an executive, and it was such a funny question, but they got it at the end, where they were like, but like, how's the quality of the money from these patrons? Or like, is it just a bunch of people that are into crypto? Are they actually fans? Like, and tell me about this crowdsourcing event. And the question I asked is it better for 5 executives to greenlight a $2 million budget, or for 10,000 people to greenlight that budget and give it to us, right? And then be a part of that journey and be incentivized to flywheel on social media. Objectively, the latter is a much better approach, especially if you're a new brand. Objectively,
if you had a company and you were raising money from 1,000 shareholders, and raising 5 million from 1,000 shareholders, or 5 million from one shareholder, the one shareholder would be a lot more demanding than the 5,000 shareholders.
And probably not offer a biased opinion, right? We can sift through comments, we sift through everything. We've got mechanisms in place to get that feedback. And then social media is a whole different playground, right? The social media feedback that we get is also, it's something that I mentioned when we were announcing our show with Media One, is what we do as well, is we de-risk IP by, one, pre-packaging them with culture, and incubating that way. We also leverage social media as a way to, and atomized content, short reels, as a test kitchen. We know what's sticky. We're very quick at finding out what's not sticky. But it's not just a surface level approach, like, oh, people liked it, we got good views. No, we've got a team, including ourselves, to sift through comments, like, for real, and figure out what went right in this short story. We focused a lot on evergreen content, and what is it specifically that resonated that we can then deconstruct, and apply to longer form content. For example, we had a short story about, like, a bunch of the dinosaur friends making a campfire, and everybody has their time, like, has one shot to be a part of the process of building a campfire. Someone chops the wood, someone takes the logs, and And then the final scene is them around the fire, and there's an extra character, and it's the T-Rex, and they're all enjoying their marshmallows, and that went viral. And the most recurring comment was, "Oh, that's so funny. That's like you, Jimmy. You never help when we're building a fire or whatever." Like everybody noticed the T-Rex, and actually for us it was a happy accident. We just didn't have time to render the T-Rex like in his own scene previously. But what we learned from it was actually you can really massage something into being hyper relatable for a certain niche, and now we're leveraging that as we write the TV show, to really make it as relatable as possible. And so it is a superpower to be able to leverage that. You don't want to be just crippled by the feedback all the time, but if you're pointed in your approach to how you take that feedback, and you realize what about it really worked, and why were people sharing it, it's an absolute superpower.
What strikes me about your approach is in some ways it flips on the head the way you'd traditionally approach a TV show. Is that, you do the 5 million, 7 million pound TV show, and then you'd work out how to do collectibles and all of that stuff, where you kind of flipped that on its head and you kind of said, well, let's go from the smallest up and then we'll build to that series. But do you think doing it from the ground up has made you more sensitive to what your fans kind of want than it would be if you'd done it from kind of, the top down, really?
Absolutely. There's a parallel to the early days of like Hasbro and Mattel. You go to market with something toyetic. In our case, it was the collectibles. It's the Masters of the Universe player GI Joe, and then you realize, well, content is king, and content is what's going to pull people in. But for us, content didn't mean a TV show. It meant short form content, and that's where we were really farming the most amount of feedback that we could, among other things. I mentioned prepackaged with culture. We do a lot of pop-up events all over the world, and so we meet those early fans and we get the feedback there as well. So absolutely, I think going to market with such a frictionless initial kind of release. I mean, frictionless. There's a lot of tech involved, and you have to understand that. You have to, really understand this new way of doing things. But what I'm saying is, we're not investing, like you say, £5 million into a TV show and hoping it's sticky. We're saying, hey, we are thinking of doing this thing. Come with us in the journey if you've discovered us early. Help us build this. I think that community-driven franchising is definitely going to be the approach of the future, and you're going to see so many brands be packaged with 10,000 to 60,000, maybe 100,000 like diehard fans before we start thinking about long form content, because it's not going to be a content as product play anymore with everything that's happening with streaming. It's going to be content to product most of the time.
So how does targeting work with this? Because like it's a toyetic show, it's super cute, but obviously, it's not like kids are on there buying NFTs these days, and commenting in a social media environment is, we know kids can be there, but it's not necessarily like, if you really want to go for your sweet spot on social, you're better off targeting older. So how do you think about the demos for the show, or the targets for the show, or the IP, should I say?
It's such a fair question. I think the demos for the initial collectibles were, around 20 to 35-year-olds, but primarily male. The demos on Instagram, for example, is primarily female, over 70%, 22 to 27-year-old. But each digital playground is its own niche. And I think that the mistake a lot of studios today do is, well, what's your demo? Like, what's your age group? And of course, maybe the TV show is catered to, in our case, it'll be the 6 to 12 demographic. We understand that once they're 9, they're watching Fortnite, which is why we're thinking of gamified loops, or they're watching content on YouTube around it. So let's call it like about 8 to 9-year-olds for that content, and that's okay, because again, we can tell different types of stories in different playgrounds. If you look at SpongeBob, um, you know the phenomenon that is SpongeBob is because the internet made it its own. You have a lot of kids today that are fans of SpongeBob, have never seen a single episode. What they know is the memes and the gifs and what those mean to them. Squidward is funny because he's depressed by his day-to-day life or whatever, right? Like each character has a niche that the internet knows and has turned it into something. Bluey, by the way, the reason it resonates so hard with adults today and actually teens and has transcended is because sure, the TV show was for pre-K, but it was so good that the quality itself became a joke. Like it shouldn't be that good. And then the internet started to make something of it and create a niche around it. And if you can allow fans to create their own fandom experiences and find their niches, then a brand can speak to so many different demographics. You see it as well with Digital Circus, where imagine trying to pitch Digital Circus as a show to a studio, and they would be like, "What's your age group?" Where you're like, it speaks to a fringe audience in the 17 plus range, but it also definitely speaks to the 10-year-olds, and they would be like, "Nah, we're not so sure," right? But the reality is, many brands have done that and can. And the irony is, a lot of the brands that do that are the social media forward brands that kind of take a bet on user generated content and can say, "Hey, it's okay to speak to many people as long as you're very pointed with each medium." So if you're going to lean hard on episodic, figure out some structure around that. But then it's okay to do something different in the comic books. Who's great at that is Transformers. Transformers has a kids division, has an adults division, it has a teens division, and it works.
Those IP that have been around the longest, that have been able to extend up and down age-wise, you got Winnie the Pooh, been around longer than most IP, but you've got you've got the infant range, which is all pastel colors. You've got a CGI show. You've got Spider-Man, the same. You've got a preschool version. You've got the movies. But what's interesting is, you're right. I think the social first IP are able to do that much earlier, or with intention, because of the number of platforms and different audiences and niches that exist on those platforms. You can have a slightly different iteration and way that you articulate your IP in those spaces, which I think is really interesting.
Because you own your own distribution. So you can distribute everywhere you want and say something different in every different channel.
Yeah, and you're getting your audience is reflecting back what they love about your show. So you kind of immediately see how it extends.
Exactly. And I should say something that oftentimes the studios ask us, and they don't take this into consideration, is of course, I've been calling them digital playgrounds. Every digital playground does not necessarily translate to another. What happens on TikTok is often not reflected on what happens on Instagram. And those audiences may not speak to each other, which means that if you're approaching it a certain way that works for TikTok, and you're approaching it a certain way that works for Instagram, that's okay. And you're not actually hurting the IP, and you're not kind of being, what we call scatterbrained. It's just a newer approach of doing things.
Interesting. You're not cannibalizing. You're literally finding a new audience there. Andrew,
but you do need to find budget for that, though, because you have to iterate, right? Like you can't don't just put things on a platform and expect one format to work across all. There's even nuance between what works on a TikTok and what works on an Instagram reel and what works on a YouTube.
Yeah, and therein is the superpower of our go-to-market strategies. Maybe Andrew can go through, but we do make our box office event essentially for every nascent IP is the release, the marketing and the release of these collectibles early on. Again, we hold royalties for every time these collectibles are sold to other people. But it is a superpower. It's the next iteration of a layer of crowdfunding. And for us, we always get asked the question, like, how can you guys afford to just invest so much in social media? It's like, well, that was the mandate. Is hey, we're using these collectibles, we're funding that first process, and now we're getting into early development, and everybody gets to see it, and everybody sort of that is holding these collectibles are in it for the ride. But maybe Andrew can go.
So Andrew, could you kind of explain a little bit more about what makes the way you guys operate different in terms of how you kind of approach these things?
Yeah, I think it's Nick hit on some points of, there's opportunity in selling digital collectibles in that market. And so there's some money there. But honestly, if those are people who are familiar with that, NFT prices and that kind of stuff, we've never actually made a tremendous amount of money. Like there's some headline numbers that are really, really big. We've never done anything to that degree, which I think is actually better. You don't really want to oversell and go into the zone of just like ultra collectible. It really becomes difficult to translate down into these other areas. But then, I think a lot of the innovation, so to speak, comes internally and also comes from the mediums where we're distributing. So on the medium side, that is to say social media, you're able to test, iterate, and like kind of fail very quickly, right? So, a stat that I like that's come across my desk a few times is that to build like an original tentpole IP costs $180 million, right? That's like the sort of benchmark number in Hollywood, right? But going back to this testing, iteration, feedback thing, on social media, every clip that we do has a very de minimis cost relative to that. It's a few $1,000s. And if a clip doesn't work, it's not breaking the bank. And then like Nick said, well, this campfire clip is doing well. Okay, so now we've learned a little bit. And so that funding into that medium becomes a far more high ROI, if you will, right? In terms of if your return is viewership and engagement and perpetuating this brand at large. So it becomes a far more efficient use of capital when you're testing in these different environments. And then also, because you control distribution, you're able to, I think the way people used to think about things and demographically is like, well, there's a 4 o'clock slot, there's a 5 o'clock slot, there's a 6 o'clock slot, Saturday morning, Sunday morning, if you want cartoons, let's say, right? And now it's sort of everything is always available all the time. And so now your distribution is like, okay, well, I can actually have all the slots I want. And that's actually TikTok, and that's YouTube, and that's Instagram, and that's Twitter. And then it's, maybe it is still maybe traditional distribution where it applies itself, and streamers. So now you can actually craft this content and again, gear that capital allocation towards the things that you're finding success in, right? So I don't need to like toss it into a slot and then find out, oh my God, actually it turns out SpongeBob is really popular with a whole different demographic who's actually not home from work at 5 o'clock, right? So, you actually get to test, iterate, and spend that money in the right way. And we're talking nowhere near this $180 million level, right? And then on the other side of things is internally, we've got a really great crew of people, and we've built our pipeline for this, right? So, a lot of what we do on socials is all, there's a lot of great evergreen content, and we've got to do that to make the brand, itself. But then, sometimes you want to do trends, whether it's a dance or the clips that are going, if a big studio is not going to be able to produce like a nice little clip at the quality we do in a week, right? Or maybe they will, but, they've got the resources, but taking that pipeline and making it capable of doing that is very difficult. Because we started from the ground up with this intent in mind, our pipeline is capable of pushing out great content that hits trends on time, from sort of ideation to storyboarding all the way through to, final render in a very quick period, right? And so, if you really want to hit something, we could do it in 5 days. We could probably do it in less if we really wanted to push the envelope. And that's without even working overtime, right? Like that's just normal. So we've innovated on both those sides where your capital allocation decisions are way more informed. They cost less to make mistakes. And then on the production side, we've innovated in such a way where it doesn't cost us a lot to like push out a clip in quick time, hit the right notes in the right places. And I think those are really great points. And that $180 million tentpole risk, so to speak, is the reason we don't see a lot of original content coming out, right? It's all this iterative stuff or, and if you're like a studio exec, yeah, I would find it really, really tough in today's competitive environment to push out a completely original IP that no one's ever heard of, right?
With that in mind, apologies for interrupting. How much content do you make that is evergreen, and how much do you set aside for that reactive, trend-driven stuff? Because it's a balance, right? You got to strike a balance between the two.
Yeah. So the mandate that we have is it needs to be at least 80% evergreen, and a 20% is allocated to trends. And the reason when we approach trends, we're very careful. It is very, very rare that we would do a trend that has no further use case than to just shout on top of the mountaintops, right? Like it's for us, a dance makes sense because when you see minions dancing a trend that everybody knows, that's a cameo. It's the same way we approach our stuff. So there's a lot of value add there. We can also use the dance content when we make pop-up events, things like that. So there's a lot of value there for experiences. We stay away from the trends that like a bucket trend. Like who cares? That's not a story that's going to remain relevant. But dances always are. Sure, the song.
But to be fair, it was for a very good cause. So
Yeah. It was for a great cause. But because we're not because it's animated and it's not like we just have a camera we can film someone. We have to take calculated a more calculated approach to how we allocate our artists. But the point being is the reason we do those trends is, I mean, one, again, we can reuse the dances, but uh, we massage the algorithm. So oftentimes, if we have a very successful evergreen video, we will follow suit with a dance to further juice the algo, and vice versa. Sometimes we might preempt with a dance that we know might just trigger the algorithm. Then we'll do an evergreen content because we don't boost content. So for us, everything has to be super organic. We have to have confidence in the numbers, and we don't. I mean, we care about views, and executives care about views, but what we're really looking for is engagement and retention. How many people are liking? How many people are commenting? How many people are sharing? And how many people are following and are making the effort to participate? It's a much better metric for us, and so that's why we keep things organic and we focus on evergreen. And look, the secret sauce. If I zoom out, like we're leveraging tech, we're leveraging all this kind of stuff, but the real secret sauce is you gotta get people to fall in love with the characters. That's always number one.
Yeah, it goes back to something I remember you saying at Annecy when we met, which was, I think we were talking about another social media marketeer or creator that was moving into created animated, an animated series. And he was taking very much a kind of a marketing approach. So he'd made it and then they'd try and promote it. And you said, and I'd remembered it since you said it, you said your approach was to kind of try and build a super fan, one super fan after another. And it was less about kind of taking a product and marketing it, and more about making something so good that you kind of build an army of fans. Could you kind of talk a bit more about what your strategy is to really kind of reward and build those fans?
Yeah, so I think that, and Andrew can get into it as well, but I think that traditionally the relationship with creators or studios is, here's the content, take it or leave it, interact with it, and that's about it. And for us, especially with where the world's going, everything's becoming more and more digital. Attention spans are all over the place. A big part of making those fans feel seen is constant interaction with them. I think people more and more demand interaction, um, and through the collectibles as well, and the digital passport, we're building a system to it's very much a loyalty system that can speak to all of our verticals. So for example, the physical products that we talked about this before, it's a lot like the Lego store. Actually, it's almost like a sort of leaderboard system for collectors, but it will also reward people for engaging in different ways, whether they comment on our social media, whether they create user generated content for us. If they're buying the physicals, there's other reward loops in there. Maybe you watch our show in the first episode in the first 48 hours and you get a limited collectible. But if you have 4 of those collectibles, then you get to redeem a limited edition backpack just in time for school's back. So we're thinking about these loops that already exist in the gaming world, but for whatever reason have never been done in content. And the reason it hasn't been done is because the tech wasn't there. We can do that, leveraging some certain on-chain loops, but we're really thinking about that is looking for ways to reward early fandom. Of course, we invite all of these fans to the events. For example, Annecy, they had the red carpet treatment, everything. That's more fun for the adults, obviously. But for the kids, it'll be limited edition items that they can flex, whether it's digital or physical. It'll be a slew of things that speak to them, especially the ones that are already kind of uh, into that sort of strategy on the gaming side of things, right? It's something that the kids are really intimate with to begin with.
I can add a ton on that. I mean, Nick touched on a whole bunch of things that we're doing at Claynosaurz and building. Ultimately, though, like the thesis, and I think this I feel like it should resonate with most people, is that it's so competitive in the landscape now for content. I think it's 500 hours of YouTube is uploaded every minute or something like that, right? So, and then streamers, and there's like so much content that to build the next great franchise or next great original franchise, or the franchise of the future. So I'm saying singular, but multiples. you need to bring fans into the pie, right? Like you need to reward them for what they're doing. And I think it's, it's a few things. And like, this is where I think it resonates is that, advertising budgets going towards, adverts on the side of a bus or commercials that, people have so many screens, commercials don't do anything anymore. These kinds of things don't really work. And I think, younger generations are ever more aware of advertising, so if you're scrolling on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube Shorts and you see like sponsored or promotion, you don't even care what it is. I don't want to do that. Or if it's even like a brand placement thing that's not done properly, people know, I don't care. So which makes word of mouth like so important. And that's, personally, and I think this is where the resonation comes, is like when I think about what's the next thing I'm going to watch, it's actually because like Nick told me, or my wife's friend told her, hey, like this is what you should watch. And so you get your advertising, so to speak, comes from people you trust, and it comes from people who are fans of something else, right? So building the fan is exceptionally important for your marketing, right? And I think that the next big franchises are going to come out of fans being properly rewarded for their contribution, frankly. Like I think Nick gave this Lord of the Rings example before, but even like an example like a Star Wars where, the brand has this longevity that's now, 50, 60 years long. And, there's definitely massive dead periods there, but the torch is carried by the fans, right? And they never had to reward the fans for that because there was no competition at the time. But I think that, this will be very, very important. And the example that I like quite a bit is that, a lot of us, when we're, people text a lot now, right? Even business wise, we're in conversations where it's Telegram or WhatsApp or whatever. It's a lot of text messaging or on these different applications versus not too long ago and you have to call everybody. But because of that, people send a lot of GIFs, right? And those are actually really great micro moments to like,
they are.
Be a little funny or like show something,
Mm.
a little bit of your own personality or emotion, like a picture speaks 1,000 words kind of thing, right? And when you're searching for a GIF, whatever word you use, happy or sad or whatever it might be, and you got a slew of options, well, perhaps the option that you're going to choose to share when you're sort of indifferent between a few is the one where that brand is actually rewarding you for sharing it. Maybe not in some massive material amount because it's sharing a GIF, but you're like, oh, like I'll do that one, right? And suddenly you perpetuate this brand where people are talking about it more. They want to talk about it. Obviously, the underlying is the content's always got to be good, right? Like that GIF has to be good, has to represent what you're trying to achieve. The content to watch it and be rewarded to watch it has to be good. And I think that's another one is like when you're scrolling Netflix or YouTube. My wife and I spend hours just scrolling through what's streaming to eventually just be like, we're going to go to bed and we chose nothing. Like, it's just insane, right? It's like overload, right?
I had one of those nights last night.
It resonates. Like people have this, right?
Now that's the process, right? It's like watching content. It's just
I
searching
to
for
them
content.
3 times. I was like, no, actually no.
There you go.
I should say that for these loyalty systems, what's really important and something that Lego does really well, and Steam and airlines as well, is you have to reward fans and give them compounding returns for things they're doing anyways. You'll never force someone to do anything, and that's the wrong approach for a loyalty system. You have to feel like, oh, like I was doing these and I just got this. Like,
yes.
In an airline loyalty system, oftentimes if you use Uber, which is something you'll use on your day-to-day life, you're getting points. You're like, oh, that's kind of neat. That's like awesome, right? Like I was going to do this anyways, but now I feel like I'm actually getting something for it. That's the secret sauce.
Yeah. And that's when fandom really becomes your moat, doesn't it? In this world of endless content choice that we've been speaking about, that true fandom becomes your moat. That becomes the bridge that links episodes or the bridge that's between movies. They're the ones that keep that flame alive, to Andrew's point about Star Wars. I think, thank you so much. This has been super interesting. And what's really interesting to me, and I know it will be to our listeners too, is this new way of approaching it, because everybody is looking for funding. Funding is harder to come by than ever. And arguably even the NFT thing, that time has gone. But this idea of bringing fans along for the journey, then building super fans from day one, it keeps coming up quite a lot in our conversations. And it's really important at this moment in time when the power is with fans. because there is so much content. The power is with
100%.
them. So it forces us and you as creators to serve them and to serve them well. And in a way, I think that's a positive.
And Joe, what we're getting into soon, which is not something we've been hyper public about, but it's happening behind the scenes, is we don't really have the cold start problem to finding other creatives. We come from their world. Most of the animators that started this business know just about every other one. We recently, Andrew and I, we were at Pixar, and a lot of them were like, "Can you guys give like a masterclass on Web3 like in the atrium?" Or like, "Yeah, I mean, we can come back and do that if you guys really want." But the point is, very soon the plans is to create a sort of the internet's version of like Y Combinator meets Pixar. So like a decentralized approach to the studio system, especially for creators.
Yeah.
Sort of like a creator economy for animators, if you will. And we already have animators pitching to us in droves, like in droves. It's almost overwhelming. And the plan is to really take that energy, take our expertise in this new internet technology, and how you can foster the early fans through that development cycle, and do it for many creators.
Yeah.
And then within the next couple of years, the whole thing will be democratized, and it's almost like your Kickstarter approach. But in the beginning, it'll be curated, and so we're building satellites of creators that have, for the longest time, either been told no by Disney, Nickelodeon, etc., or they just don't trust that system anymore because they keep almost no piece of the pie. Or they'll strike a deal, the thing goes into production hell for 5 years, it gets shelved, and they don't even own a piece of their IP, right?
Yeah.
And so we're saying, actually, that system is broken, especially in an ecosystem where there's going to be an oversaturation of content. Everything's going to be monotonous. AI will come in and make that even worse, which makes good content, which makes new discovery extremely valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Taste is going to become really important.
100%. And all these animators that the creatives, like, I don't think there's a lot of fear about AI, and I think that what is my job as an animation supervisor is to make it look like 40 animators are one animator, right? And I think that what's going to happen is a lot of the animators are going to become tastemakers. AI can't create; it can only recreate. And it doesn't matter how good it gets, you still need that human element, and you still need that conductor. So I think most of these creators will become conductors of sorts, and actually empower themselves to be way faster, way more flexible. But I think the world is heading there, where a lot of that creative juice is going to be exponential, actually, with these new tools.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that your example has really illuminated for me as well is that you're turning the tables on, previously it was the commissioner that was the gatekeeper, but I think what we're looking at here is empowering the communities, and so the fans become the gatekeepers of all of that content.
Yeah.
Which is very exciting.
Amazing. Thank you. So enlightening. And we're really pleased that you joined us today, Andrew and Nicholas. Andy,
I'll do the sign-off.
Do your thing.
Thanks for joining us, Nick and Andrew, and thanks you guys for listening. Please like and subscribe wherever you can find us, and we will see you next week.